Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Mohamed wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, all praise and thanks belong to God, the Lord of the worlds, and may peace, blessings, and prayers be upon all of God's prophets and messengers from Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses to Jesus to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters, friends, viewers, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, welcoming you to today's episode of CAIR on Air. Thank you so much for joining us. And a special thank you to our listeners on American Muslim 360. We always appreciate your support and participation. As you all know, this week we have been hosting a special series of programs focused on remembering the September 11th attacks and their impact on our country, and in particular, the American Muslim community over the past 20 years. We have discussed the ways that our government policies change, national security overreach that violated the civil rights and civil liberties of all Americans. We've also discussed that day and the horror of that day that all Americans experienced, including the Muslim community. And today we like to discuss another aspect of the aftermath of 9/11, and that is the fluctuation and rise in hate crimes against Muslims and others across our nation in the 20 years after the September 11th, 2001 attacks. As you all know, hate crimes against Muslims increased after 9/11. What you may not know, and we're going to discuss today, is that immediate time right after 9/11 was not the worst that it got for hate crimes. That in fact, years later, it got much worse for hate crimes against Muslims and others. And you also may not know that the first person in America killed in a hate crime because of 9/11 was not a Muslim. We're going to talk about who that was and how these hate crimes impacted various Americans, not just Muslims, over the past 20 years. That will be the focus of our program today. If you have any questions you'd like to pose during the program, just put them in the comments on Facebook. You can also share your thoughts there as well, inshallah. With that, let's bring on all of our guests. Let's welcome them to the program. I'd like to start by welcoming on Dina Chehata, who is a civil rights attorney with CAIR Los Angeles, the Los Angeles chapter of CAIR, which is our largest office in the United States. I'll also note Dina is an old friend of mine from Georgetown Law. It's wonderful to be working with her at CAIR. Assalamu alaikum, Dina. How are you?
Alaikum assalam. I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, let's bring on Ahmed Mohamed, who is a civil rights attorney and the legal director of CAIR New York. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ahmed.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Brother Ahmed is also a former attorney with our national office, and he did such an amazing job that our New York chapter stole him, so he can do amazing work for the people of New York, and he's been doing amazing work. So we're always happy to have him back with us to discuss these important issues. And finally, let's bring on Dr. Rucha Kaur, who is a member of the Sikh Coalition. Hello, Dr. Kaur. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. And if I can introduce you briefly for our viewers who have not seen you on the show before, because this is your first time, Dr. Kaur serves as the Community Development Director of the Sikh Coalition. Now, in this role, she manages the team that is building and empowering a national network of grassroots leaders to promote interfaith solidarity, defend civil rights, and raise Sikh awareness. Since joining the Sikh Coalition, she has led community development team to enhance engagement with the goal of building deeper and long-lasting connections with local Sikh communities across America. She's also led on the strategic direction for grassroots engagement for nearly 300 gurdwaras, and she has facilitated more than 30 Sikh awareness presentations for various audiences across our nation. She's also trained 50 local leaders to facilitate Sikh awareness and enhance local civic engagement. Very important and excellent work the Sikh Coalition is doing, and we're always happy to amplify and support their work. Thank you all for joining us today for this discussion.
Thank you.
So let's dive in. Obviously, we are approaching the 20th anniversary of that horrific, tragic day that changed our country and in particular the Muslim community. And those changes are still ongoing 20 years later. One of those changes that we all are familiar with is the rise in hate crimes in the wake of 9/11. And as I noted in the intro, hate crimes, this increase did not only impact Muslims, it impacted other communities, in particular the Sikh community, because bigots often can't tell different religions apart and often confuse our Sikh friends for being Muslim, and also just hate Sikhs in general, even if they know that they are Sikhs. So I want to start by asking you, Dr. Kaur, to tell us about, we're going to talk about the Muslim experience, but I want you to tell us a bit about your perspective on how 9/11 changed the state of hate crimes in this country, and in particular, how it impacted your community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much once again for having me. And before I begin, just a quick, for those of you who don't know the Sikh Coalition, we're a Sikh civil rights organization that works to ensure that Sikhs, along with other minorities, are able to practice their faith freely. And we do this through courtrooms, classrooms, the halls of Congress, and of course in our community. To answer your question, Sikhs did experience an increase in prejudice and hate crimes post 9/11 due to general anti-Sikh bias, general xenophobia, white supremacy, as well as sort of the false conflation of the Sikh articles of faith and images that they were seeing on television of members of other communities. So the Sikh Coalition was literally founded in the hours after 9/11 to combat hate and discrimination that the community was facing, and the heightened need for resources in the community. In the first month after 9/11, for example, we tracked more than 300 anti-Sikh bias incidents, and those have continued to increase. The FBI began tracking anti-Sikh hate crimes and bias incidents in 2012 after the attack in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, on the Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And recent data does show that Sikhs are among the 5 most commonly targeted religious groups in the country.
Someone always has to be muted at least once in an online program, but it shouldn't be the host. Thank you so much for noting that, Dr. Kaur. I mean, that is so important to note. I mean, you mentioned the attack in Wisconsin, and also the brother, or the man who was killed right after 9/11. That was the first victim of a hate crime post 9/11, was a Sikh, a man. And so it's very important to recognize that this rise in hate crimes doesn't only impact the direct desired target, but other minorities as well. Because as you noted, white supremacy, xenophobia, Islamophobia, these are all interconnected, and no one is safe from it once that tide starts rising. Dina, let me go to you. Tell us about your personal perspective. By the way, you and I were both relatively quite young when 9/11 happened. Tell us about your personal perspective, anything that you want to share about the change in hate crimes, and also as in your role as an attorney, what your perspective is on how hate crimes in America fluctuated in regard to the Muslim community post 9/11.
Well, I know personally, like many young Muslim Americans in this country, 9/11 really put a lot of us in the position where we had to very quickly come to terms with our identity as Muslims in America. We had to figure out who we were, what we stood for, and how to deal with the barrage of hate, prejudice, and the misunderstanding that came from the general public regarding what it is to be Muslim in America. So I clearly remember as a young student having to quickly, figure out what it meant to be Muslim in this country. And that led me all the way to wanting to do the work that I do today as a civil rights attorney. We know that after 9/11, really the policies that started at the top for the government trickled all the way down to the public in terms of how we saw immediately after 9/11, thousands of Muslims were detained, citizens and non-citizens. And then you had the government start implementing policies where it became so easy to profile Muslim Americans based on their religion, or people who present as Muslim American, like Sikh Americans. And in the work that we do at CAIR and as a civil rights attorney, we see that these policies that I think we discussed in our programs this week, they allow people to continue profiling Muslims, people from the AMEMSA community, so Arab, Middle Eastern, South Asian, based on the perception of who they are. And in my work, I see people continually being profiled as Muslims and Americans. So in the past year, we've represented several people who continue to be assaulted and face vicious crimes and attacks. And maybe we could talk about that later in the program, simply for their identity. And we have a problem still where we are unable to sort of prosecute crimes against Muslims as hate crimes, because there's a lack of awareness that when Muslims are attacked, we are simply told that these people who attack them are lone wolves or people who, hello?
Yeah, we're here, Dina. We may have lost Dina. Well, it's okay. We'll bring her back. We'll figure out the tech thing. But thank you, Dina, for that. Okay, Dina, you back? Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yep, we're here. We can hear you.
I'm sorry about that.
No problem. We can hear you. Continue.
Okay. So, hello? I'm sorry. The screen is blanking. I don't see.
Okay, well, we can see you. We can see you and hear you. So carry on. You're good. Okay, we'll come back to Dina. Technical problems. Brother Ahmed, let me go to you. So we talked about that rise in hate crimes that impacted Muslims right after 9/11. I want you to share your perspective on that and how it impacted other communities. But one of the things that we've noted, if you look at polling, public polling of the public sentiments towards Muslims, you'll see a slight increase in negative views after 9/11, but it's not until about 10 years later that you see a drastic shift. For example, in the ABC News national poll, towards like 60% negative, 30% positive, around 2010. And it's also around 2010 you start to see that increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes that the FBI is reporting. So you have an increase after 9/11, levels off a bit, doesn't go all the way back down, but kind of levels off, and then you start seeing a spike again 10 years later. I suspect a lot of that had to do with what happened in New York in 2010 with Park 51. But share your perspective, Ahmed, on not only on what happened right after 9/11, but why hate crimes may have started to increase years after 9/11.
Yeah, very excellent question. Great setup to it. I'm first very honored to be part of this panel with Dr. Kaur and Dina. So I think what you said is very important. I think it kind of boils down to what we've been saying the past few years, especially when it comes to our elected officials and folks in public, is that words matter. And what we saw in 2010 is that bigots, Islamophobes, xenophobes, really started this Islamophobic network in earnest, where they organized, they created hate groups, and they targeted Muslims. And in particular, they started with Park 51, which was a potential mosque that was going to be built near the site of Ground Zero, where the tragedy of 9/11 occurred. And that brought out a lot of anti-Muslim haters and generated a lot of anti-Muslim animus around the country. And when we are seeing anti-Muslim bigots go on Fox News and CNN and other media platforms where the media is being complicit in providing these huge platforms for these individuals, they're allowed to spread their message of hate. And that indoctrinates and breeds a lot of hate within the average citizen who may not know a Muslim, right? And we know from studies is that, individuals who know Muslims, right, as their neighbors, like Muslims, they're friendly with Muslims, and they think Muslims are excellent neighbors. And there are studies that found that Muslims are one of the groups that are least likely to commit crimes in your neighborhoods, right? But it's the people who don't know Muslims. It's the people who are very ignorant about what Islam is and who Muslims are. They don't even know that the doctor they go to is probably Muslim, right? Or the dentist that they're seeing to help them with their dental issues is Muslim, or the firefighter, or that police officer, or their teacher, right? In New York City, we have 10% of all teachers in New York City are Muslim, right? And they're educating your children, but you don't know that. And there's power in fear, right? And fear of the unknown, of something that you don't know. And that is what these anti-Muslim bigots have really been able to harness, right? And we really saw it come to the forefront when President Trump was elected into office, where that was the time where we had the highest rise in Muslim hate crimes in this country that were being reported. Many others were not being reported, especially after 9/11, when CAIR was still a very young organization at that point, just started in 1994. And American Muslims were really not as active or as vocal as they are now. And now they've had to be vocal. They've had to be active, civically engaged, because our lives were literally at threat.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ahmed. I think it's such an important perspective to think about that trend, that change in fluctuation. What happened in New York with Park 51 really was I call it the coming out party for anti-Muslim hate groups. They moved from the dark recesses of the internet to the streets, to mainstream media outlets. People remember Pamela Geller was showing up on mainstream media outlets spouting her crazy. And so that really was a rallying moment for them. And I think that is why we saw an increase in anti-Muslim bigotry and sentiment starting around 2010, and then spiking, of course, through 2014 with Trump and ISIS and San Bernardino and all the other things that happened. Rucha, tell me about how the Sikh community and your organization has responded to this rise in hate crimes. It's a unique situation you're in, being victims of xenophobia and white supremacism, and also being victims of something that has nothing to do with your community at all, which is, this so-called war on terror. So what are the things that your community has been doing to try to address this rise in hate crimes? And maybe these are lessons that we and others can take from you.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to share this kind of ahead of time. As we're talking, one of the things that the Sikh community as a large and our organization definitely is doing is we're really trying to stay away from the whole mistaken identity rhetoric, because that sort of says that there is a correct identity to target, and that isn't true. That is not, Sikh values teach us to fight for injustice for all communities, and so we would never throw our brothers and sisters under the bus that way. And so there is, we don't follow that rhetoric of mistaken identity. And really, as a community, we've chosen to respond with love and trying to do more to raise awareness, trying to build solidarity, show resilience. As an organization, we've really worked hard to create awareness about the community, the Sikh community, and the issue of hate and violence and discrimination that the community faces through advocacy and pro bono legal work around hate crimes and discrimination. In addition to that sort of body of work, we're also working hard in the field of education. We're trying to make sure that classrooms are safer for Sikh children and children in other minority faiths. They are more inclusive. They are able to see themselves represented in the literature that they're studying, and also making sure that classrooms are safe from bullying. And so raising awareness of the faith, raising awareness of who we are as a community and what the faith stands for, doing more in terms of engaging the community, the Sikh community, and the larger community as well, building community power so Sikhs are able to connect with their neighbors. And you mentioned that we do a lot of Sikh awareness trainings, and we train community members to do that work further in their larger communities and sort of become that catalyst for change. Through the media, elevating the Sikh American profile and sharing information about community members that is positive. As you may know, one of the founding core values of the Sikh faith is seva, and we have seen a lot of stories about Sikhs stepping out of their gurdwaras and stepping out of their circles and working to uplift their local communities and doing seva outside of gurdwaras. And of course, working with organizations such as yours and others to make sure that that voice is clearly heard, that no community deserves to be targeted by hate, and standing up for each other when unfortunate incidents happen.
Absolutely, Doctor. I think that's key, right? Is I love that you noted, you said responding with love. And in Islam, I think we say responding to evil with good. And I think when you can, that's the right thing to do, especially when you're dealing with bigotry from people who are simply, they're not hateful at heart, but they're misinformed. All they know about a minority community is what they see on Fox News at night, and they're open to having their mind changed. They're open to listening. But at the same time, the other danger we have is when people who should know better, elected officials, policymakers, are engaging in and fomenting bigotry. Dina, let me bring it back to you on this point. I think you were alluding to earlier the notion that the government's targeting of Muslims after 9/11 here and abroad contributed to the atmosphere in which hate crimes can thrive. I want you to elaborate on that a bit, and also tell me about California. So obviously you're in LA, and the stereotype is that California is more diverse and liberal and more tolerant, and yet there are significant issues with hate crimes in California. You've got all types of people because you have so many people, but that includes bigots. Tell me about how hate crimes and how you deal with that in a state like California. Is it as big of a problem there as I think it is, for example, in the Deep South? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so what I was alluding to earlier is that after 9/11, we saw a series of policies that came down from the top that made it easier to profile Muslims. So, for example, we saw new guidelines issued by the Attorney General, for example, to the FBI, allowing them to move from targeting people because they exhibited some sort of suspicious activity to essentially targeting people because they look like or represent a religion or nation of origin or ancestry that they deem problematic, i.e., that is related to Islam or Arabs or South Asians or Middle Eastern people. The USA Patriot Act was passed in a lightning speed 45 days after 9/11, and you see the infringement on people's rights to privacy and on basically surveilling the Muslim American community. And then you saw in New York the NYPD launched a mapping program where they started mapping Muslim communities. And unfortunately, here in LA and Southern California, they followed suit pretty quickly. So we saw, starting in about the mid-2000s, we saw a concerted effort by local law enforcement and the FBI to start really surveilling the Muslim American community. And we had an operation here called Operation Flex, where the FBI essentially sent in informants into our mosques, where they pretended to be Muslims. And we had a specific mosque in Irvine where an informant went in and basically spent thousands and hundreds of hours recording Muslims in their homes, in their places of worship, and feeding that information back to the FBI. And the instructions he was given was essentially, we don't care if these people are suspicious. We don't care if they're criminals. We just care if they're Muslim. And CAIR Los Angeles, we're co-counseling with the ACLU in a very important case called Fazaga v. FBI that's right now going to be heard before the Supreme Court on November 8th, dealing with the specific case of Operation Flex. And I think the really important thing for people to realize is something like Operation Flex in Southern California that basically involved thousands of Muslim Americans yielded 0 criminal convictions. And so what we need to understand is, by targeting someone just because they're Muslim or Arab or Muslim presenting or Arab presenting, or from our communities like South Asian communities, that really does not make us safer in the United States. It doesn't make us safer. And in fact, we see the Washington Post, I don't know if you guys saw this, they recently issued a data analysis where they showed that since 2015, right-wing extremists have involved the most number of plots and attacks in the United States, not necessarily left-wing groups or Muslim groups or Arab groups. So if we're concerned about keeping people safe in this country, we're really doing each other a disservice by focusing on a specific population. And these policies that start at the top, they make it so easier for everyone else to sort of misclassify and target and stereotype and prejudice. And it doesn't help protect us. We see that with the statistics. In fact, it really harms us in the long run.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Excellent points, Dina. Ahmed, coming back to you, one of the problems that we have in understanding exactly what has happened and is happening with hate crimes is that there's no one uniform way to figure out what's actually happening. So local law enforcement not required to document hate crimes. Some states don't even have hate crime laws in the books. And so the federal government has hate crime numbers, but they are almost certainly underreported and they're definitely incomplete. So tell us more about that, Ahmed. In New York, is to your knowledge, is NYPD, are they collecting hate crime data, reporting that to federal law enforcement? And can that help us get a better handle on what's happening out there if we are getting better numbers? Any thoughts you want to share on that?
Yeah, I want to piggyback on what Dina was kind of mentioning, because I think the one of the primary issues about hate crimes is there's a lack of reporting, right? And when you have agencies like the FBI and your local law enforcement who engage in racial profiling and infiltration of your communities, that is a breakdown in trust. And when you distrust local law enforcement, when you believe that you're going to be the target of an investigation, instead of being treated as a victim of a hate crime, you are less likely to call that law enforcement agency and say, hey, I have just been attacked because of my faith, right? That's number one. That is a driving factor of why there's such huge distrust between not just Muslims, right, but our African-American communities, our other minority communities that have been targeted over the years by law enforcement, is they don't want the local law enforcement help, right? They think local law enforcement is there to do harm to their communities, not provide assistance. That's something we cannot just kind of bypass, right? It's something that law enforcement has to deal with on a systemic level to rebuild that trust in a way that's honest and truthful. And to do that, you need transparency and accountability, right? We can't continue what's been currently happening, especially here in the NYPD, where they say, we want to move on from the mapping of Muslims, but we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't surveil the community. We didn't engage in profiling. Everything we did was, on the books. But we love you and we want you to trust us, right? It doesn't work that way, right? If you did something wrong, you have to own up to it, apologize, change your policies, your structure, create transparency. As they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And that's how you start taking the appropriate steps forward, right? Now, here in New York City, the NYPD does report on a monthly and annual basis the hate crime statistics. And they do report those statistics to the FBI. But look, New York City is just one municipality in New York State. These smaller law enforcement agencies, don't have the manpower as the NYPD. The other thing that depresses numbers is that the NYPD and other institutions do not investigate hate crimes properly, right? And even when they are investigating those hate crimes, they're not taking into consideration the experiences of Muslims and what the victims are actually saying, right? We have seen in a lot of circumstances the NYPD creating very, strange sometimes and contradictory excuses on why they will not prosecute a case as a hate crime, or even sometimes why they will not even investigate an issue as a hate crime. We've had a young woman who had to investigate her own hate crime, right? The crime itself was closed, saying, sorry, we don't have any evidence. And she went for 30 days and investigated and found video footage all around the neighborhood to present to the NYPD and force them to reopen the case once, CAIR-New York began to advocate and assist her. We've been involved in cases where, a young man was struck with, a baseball bat while being called, anti-Arab and Islamophobic slurs. And yet, the NYPD said, no, the incident wasn't really about his faith. It was about it was a car driving rage incident, right? And so what we see is sometimes when it comes to the Muslim experience, what that individual is saying they believe happened doesn't really matter that much, right? Other communities, they may have more, political power in this community are not treated in the same way. And so what we have seen is that not all hate crimes are created the same. We saw it, when the Asian American community here was being attacked left and right? It got so bad, but the NYPD wanted to brush it under the rug that they created a whole separate category, right, called COVID-19 crimes in order to not be classified under the hate crime statute. And so they wouldn't have to investigate it as a hate crime. Now, eventually what happened is the Asian American community rallied and a lot of solidarity support came their way that forced the NYPD to take those crimes more seriously. And now we see record numbers, unfortunately, are being reported of anti-Asian hate crimes in our city.
That's excellent information to share, and it's sad to hear that even in a city like New York, NYPD, as diverse it is, that you're having these problems. And one thing you said that immediately struck me, you mentioned the case of a man beating an Arab man and saying anti-Arab, anti-Islam slurs, and the police saying, oh, it was a parking or a car dispute. It reminds me of North Carolina and the killing of our three winners at that apartment. And what was the initial law enforcement statement? This is a dispute about parking, right? He was angry about his parking space, and that's why he decided to go on a shooting spree against visible Muslims. I mean, it's insanity to think that it would happen in New York. It shouldn't happen anywhere, but especially in New York. where it's a more diverse place. Dina, you want to share something? Go ahead.
I did, because you brought up that case of those three community members that were brutally slayed in North Carolina. The interesting thing about that case is that the families of those 3 victims tried very hard to get this crime prosecuted as a hate crime. So North Carolina didn't have a statute on the books to prosecute first-degree murder, like a hate crime statute. So the families met with federal prosecutors to try to get this crime prosecuted as a hate crime. And I don't believe they had any success with doing that. So that's an issue we face in our communities, and we see it as well. Like Ahmed, we had a Muslim imam here in Southern California just at the end of last year who was assaulted by someone in his apartment complex who called him a dirty Arab, a terrorist, told him to get out of the country. I mean, very specific terms that indicate this man's assault was motivated by hate and profiling. And our role is to advocate on behalf of these victims and our community members, but unfortunately, you see a very strong resistance where law enforcement and then the prosecutors really don't want to prosecute as hate crimes. And even though we succeeded in pushing and advocating and having them investigated seriously, where the suspect was eventually sentenced with a crime of battery, they did not prosecute it as a hate crime. And so our role as an advocacy organization is to continue saying, hey, it's really important that when crimes and assaults happen against minority communities, the Muslim community, and other ally communities, that we take it seriously, and not just when the violent act is committed by a minority or a Muslim, because that's where you get this very skewed narrative that's very harmful.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're at the 30-minute mark, so we're going to close now. But Dr. Carr, I want to turn it back to you for final response. So we're approaching the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Our country's laws have changed, our policies have changed, society has changed in so many ways. But looking forward, are you hopeful about the future, about not only your community's future, but our country's ability to continue to be diverse and welcoming, tolerant, and get past this hump, if you might call it, this very long, centuries-long hump of bigotry and discrimination, hate crimes? What are your feelings about the future?
Just, something that Dina said, communities like ours have had to deal with the trauma 2 ways, right? Post 9/11. 1, just the way everybody else dealt with the trauma, and 2, of suddenly being othered in our own countries. And so my hope is, as we are moving, we are definitely not where we were 20 years ago. I've heard stories of our founders roaming the halls of Congress, trying to get folks' attention, and not, and having to work doubly hard to do that. Whereas recently, the president and the vice president met with a bunch of AAPI organizations to listen to their issues. So the catalyst for this change is horrible. But we're definitely not where we were 20 years ago. My hope for the future, I look to the amazing community members that I have the honor of working with and serving on a daily basis, who continue to wear their articles of faith and go out in public, who continue to wear their identity proudly, who continue to embody the Sikh value of Chardi Kala, which is eternal optimism, and of Nirbhav Nirvair, living without hate, without fear on a daily basis. I'm hopeful that this, the awareness that our communities have now continues. I'm hopeful that as we move forward, the relationships that are built on solidarity and on resilience continue to move forward, and we continue to make progress.
God willing. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate great conversation, great thoughts, perspectives on this very important issue. It's a pleasure to talk to all of you, and hopefully we'll have you all on the program again soon, inshallah, to discuss more positive things, to discuss progress, moving things forward in a positive way, inshallah. Dina, Ahmed, Doctor, thank you all so much. Have a great day, inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Assalamu alaikum.
And thank you all for watching today's episode of CAIR on Air. We greatly appreciate it. As always, if there's a topic you would like us to address in the future, email us at info@cair.com. Tomorrow will be the last part of our series discussing the 20th anniversary of September 11th. And we're very pleased to be able to release to you a comprehensive report that CAIR has put together documenting not only what has changed for our country over the past 20 years after 9/11, but also in particular what has changed for the American Muslim community. We're going to put on screen briefly the report. It's coming out literally today in the next few minutes. This report is going to cover government policies that change after 9/11. You can scroll through this, our producer. Government policies that change, how they impacted our country, civil rights, civil liberties. It's going to cover hate crimes. We were just discussing the fluctuation in hate crimes of the past 20 years. And most importantly, you can scroll all the way down close to the end to our producer. A survey we conducted of American Muslims to get your perspective, your experiences about how 9/11 impacted our community over the past 20 years. So we've got data on, for example, how many Muslims have experienced personally discrimination or bigotry. We've got data on how different events over the past 20 years changed sentiments towards Muslims. We've got data on how many Muslims feel comfortable requesting a religious accommodation at work, how many Muslims feel comfortable wearing religious clothing in public. You can keep scrolling down. We've got data on the differences. What's interesting is you'll see that the answers to these questions vary a bit based on gender, male versus female, and also based on race and ethnicity. And so this survey is coming out in just a few minutes. Inshallah, we'll discuss it in more detail in the coming days. Thank you to everyone who participated in that survey. Again, thank you all for joining today's program. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow at, I believe, 1 o'clock. No, 3 o'clock for tomorrow's program. And until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.